The rain in Port Halcyon doesn't just fall, it attacks. It hits the asphalt with a vengeance, turning the neon signs of the waterfront into blurred, bleeding watercolors of pink and electric blue. I pulled the collar of my thin hoodie tighter, but it was useless. I was already soaked through, right down to the eviction notice folded into a damp square in my back pocket. Renovation violations, it had read. A bitter laugh almost escaped me. I'm Ren Delgado. I work in the city's building permits office. I'm the one who reviews the applications, who knows every inch of Title 25. My landlord wasn't renovating. He was illegally converting my unit, and I was the broke, inconvenient tenant who knew exactly which codes he was breaking. So he'd force me out, just like that. My box of art supplies was turning to pulp in my arms. My graphic novels were swelling with rainwater. I had $43.16 to my name, and a storage locker I couldn't afford. My only option was the grim, buzzing light of the Anchor in Flint. The pawn shop smelled like old pennies and stale cigars. A bell tinkled weakly as I pushed the door open. The sound immediately swallowed by the hum of fluorescent lights. I shuffled past a rack of dusty guitars and a glass case of sad, forgotten jewelry, heading for the counter at the back. I placed my old DSLR camera on the scratched glass. Its lens was cracked. It was the last valuable thing I owned, and it was broken. $20, the clerk mumbled, not even looking up from his phone. The body alone is worth $200, I argued, my voice cracking with exhaustion. Lenses shot, 20. I was about to argue, to beg, maybe when a hand slid into my line of sight on the counter. Next to my camera, it was a man's hand, clean with manicured nails, but it was the ring that caught my eye. It was thick, gold, and stamped with some kind of ridiculous falcon crest. It was the gaudiest, most ostentatious piece of metal I'd ever seen outside of a museum exhibit on pirates. The exhaustion, the rain, the sheer hopelessness of the day just bubbled up. I snorted. A small, sharp laugh escaped me. Sorry, I mumbled, trying to stifle it. It looks like a prop from an 80s gangster movie. The hand didn't move, but the man attached to it did. He turned. Slowly. I expected a guy in a tracksuit, maybe a gold chain. I was wrong. He was wearing a minimalist suit of dark, expensive gray wool that probably cost more than my entire apartment building. He was tall, with dark hair cut precisely, and a face that looked like it had been carved from marble. He wasn't loud. He was the opposite of loud. He was a vacuum, sucking all the sound and air out of the room. His eyes, gray and cold, didn't just look at me. They seemed to weigh me, assess me, and find me lacking. This was Lucien Armand. I didn't know his name then, but I knew his type. This was the kind of man who owned the buildings that guys like my landlord managed. This was the quiet, terrifying power that ran Port Halcyon. I tensed, expecting him to snap at me, to have me thrown out. Instead, a flicker of something not amusement, maybe just interest passed through his eyes. He didn't say a word. He just watched me, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical weight. Then, he did the strangest thing. He slowly, deliberately, slid the heavy gold ring from his finger. The motion was smooth, practiced. He picked it up and held it out, not to me, but placed it gently on the glass counter, right into the palm of my open hand. It was warm from his skin and shockingly heavy. "Keep it," he said. His voice was low, a rumble that seemed to vibrate in my chest. "When I give it back to you, your troubles will be gone." I stared at the ring, then at him. My default setting is skepticism. I thought it was a line, the weirdest, most arrogant pickup attempt in human history. "I know. Thanks." I tried to slide it back. "Keep it," he repeated. It wasn't a suggestion. I closed my fingers around it, the metal biting into my skin. I was too tired, too wet, and too intimidated to argue with a man who wore a $5,000 suit to a pawn shop. I shoved the ring deep into the pocket of my hoodie, next to my useless keys. "Whatever," I muttered. I turned back to the clerk. Fine, 20. The clerk, who I now saw was pale and sweating, fumbled with the register. No, ma'am. For the camera, how about 300? I blinked. What? 300, the clerk stammered, his eyes darting to the silent man beside me. I looked at Lucien Armand. He was examining a tarnished silver lighter in the case, as if he hadn't heard a thing. I took the money. I didn't understand what had just happened, but I knew better than to question it. I grabbed my cash, left the camera, and practically ran for the door, desperate to be back in the hostile but familiar rain. I burst onto the sidewalk and almost collided with a wall of muscle. 2 men blocked my path. They were big, dressed in cheap black windbreakers with a logo stitched on the breast, a stylized wave, and the words Shoreline Task Group. I knew that logo. They were a semi-public unit that inspected rental properties for the city. They were also, as everyone knew, glorified leg breakers for the big developers. Ren Delgado, the first one asked. He had a fake friendly smile that didn't reach his dead eyes. Yes, we understand you filed a complaint against your landlord, Mr. Petrovich. His smile widened. A lot of serious accusations, falsifying documents, code violations. That's messy stuff. It's true, I said, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. See, that's the thing. The second guy chimed in, stepping closer. It looks bad for a city employee to be making those kinds of claims. Looks like retaliation. Looks like you're using your position. I'm a tenant. He illegally evicted. You should really drop it, Miss Delgado, the first one said, his voice hardening. He took a step, crowding me against the pawn shop's brick wall. It would be a shame if your situation got worse. If you lost that city job, maybe. He punctuated the threat by placing his hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a gentle touch. His fingers dug in, hard. I flinched, a knot of pure, cold fear tightening in my stomach. I was trapped. That arm doesn't belong to her. The voice was quiet, but it cut through the sound of the rain like a razor. Lucien Armand was standing in the doorway of the pawn shop. He was calmly adjusting the cuff of his gray suit jacket. He looked bored. The Shoreline goons froze, their heads snapped toward him. The hand on my shoulder didn't just let go. It recoiled, as if it had touched a hot stove. The fake friendly smile was gone, replaced by a look of dawning, sickly recognition. Mr. Armand, the first guy stammered, taking half a step back. We were just having a conversation with the lady. It looked like you were finished, Lucien said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The entire street seemed to have gone silent. Even the rain felt quieter. Across the street, the engine of a matte black coupe turned over with a deep, predatory growl. It was a Halcyon 12, a custom model I'd only seen in magazines, worth more than the whole block. A man in a driver's cap, Marco Vale, got out and opened the rear passenger door, holding a black umbrella. Lucien just tilted his head, a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture. The 2 goons from Shoreline scrambled. They didn't apologize. They didn't look back. They just turned and walked away, fast, disappearing around the corner. I was left shaking, leaning against the wet brick, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The ring in my pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Lucien Armand watched me for a long moment. His expression was unreadable. He walked over, stopping a few feet away, sheltered by the umbrella Marco held. How did you know I was in trouble?" I finally managed to ask, my voice a pathetic whisper. He looked at me, the neon light catching the gray in his eyes. "I notice people who laugh at power," he said simply. "You're in the car." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. He was turning to leave, expecting me to follow. I should have run. I should have screamed. I should have done anything other than stand there, mesmerized by the man who had dismissed 2 thugs with a tilt of his head. But before I could move, it happened. The lights in the pawn shop flickered and died. Then the streetlights on our block plunged into sudden, disorienting darkness, broken only by the headlights of the Halcyon 12. Lucien Marco's voice was sharp, In the gloom, I saw movement, shadows detaching themselves from other shadows, men, moving fast, not toward us, but toward the pawn shop. I heard the distinct, sharp sound of the shop's front window shattering. I stumbled back, and the car's headlights illuminated a shard of broken glass on the pavement. In it, I caught a reflection, a man in the alley. For just a second, I saw a logo on his jacket, stark in the reflected light. It wasn't the shoreline wave. It was a different bird, a kestrel, perched on a gear, the Kestrel Union. I knew that name. They were the rival syndicate, the ones buying up the entire harbor, the ones behind the green high-rise project my landlord was making way for. They weren't just competition for Armand. They were the enemy. And they were here. "Get in the car, Ren," Lucian ordered. He knew my name. Of course he knew my name. He didn't grab me, and he just opened the door, his body shielding me from the alley. The choice was mine. Stay here, in the dark, with the Kestrel Union smashing a pawn shop, or get into the $1 million car with the Mafia boss who just saved me. I scrambled into the plush leather interior. Marco was already behind the wheel. Lucian slid in beside me, and the heavy door shut with a sound like a bank vault closing. The car pulled away from the curb, smooth and silent, leaving the chaos behind. I was trembling, clutching the $300 in one hand, the heavy gold ring in the other. I looked at him, my mind screaming 100 questions. "You should take this back," I whispered, holding out the ring. Lucian didn't look at it. He was staring out the rear window, at the darkness where the pawn shop had been. "Don't return the ring," he said, his voice final. "It will remind me that I owe you." I didn't sleep. The hum of the Halcyon 12's engine was a distant memory, but the heavy, unnatural silence of the 5-star hotel room Lucian had left me in was worse. He hadn't stayed. He'd simply had Marco escort me to the penthouse of the Orion Tower, a place I usually just drew the zoning permits for, and said, "Rest, you're safe here. We'll speak in the morning." Safe. I clutched the heavy gold ring in my hand. It was an anchor, pulling me down. I'd spent the night staring at the city lights of Port Halcyon, watching the rain stop and the gray dawn break, feeling anything but safe. Morning came, gray and unforgiving. I put on the same damp clothes from yesterday. There was a wardrobe of new, expensive clothes in the closet, but I ignored them. I was Ren Delgado, not Cinderella. I let myself out of the hotel, took a city bus, and walked into the Westbridge County Permit Office at 8:55 a.m. The fluorescent lights hummed, a flat, sterile sound that usually comforted me. Today, it felt like an accusation. I sat at my cubicle, my hands shaking as I tried to log in. My password worked, but my desktop didn't appear. Instead, a single, large pop-up box filled the screen. It was blood red and stamped with an official-looking seal I didn't recognize. "File access denied. Account flagged safety risk. Report to Supervisor Henderson immediately. Metropolitan Fiscal Guard, MFG." My blood ran cold. The MFG, I wasn't in finance. I was in building permits. Why would the Metropolitan Fiscal Guard be flagging me? "Delgado, my office." I looked up. My supervisor, Henderson, was standing by his door, his face pale, his tie askew, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. I walked into his office. He closed the door, a little too quickly. "Ren, look, I don't know what this is about, but it's serious," he stammered, shuffling papers on his desk. "What is the MFG? Bill, I've never even heard of them. They're fiscal oversight. They just called. They said your account was compromised, a safety risk." He finally looked at me, his eyes full of a pathetic, watery fear. "They need your laptop for a security audit, standard procedure." It was anything but standard. This was a silencing. The shoreline thugs couldn't scare me off, so they had sent in the bureaucratic assassins. They were burying me. And they were using my own boss's weakness to do it. This was the second part of the attack, erase the whistleblower. "Fine," I said, my voice hollow. I went to my desk, unplugged the laptop, and brought it back. I placed it on his desk. "Is that all, Bill? Ren, they also said, given the risk, it's best if you take an immediate paid leave until this is sorted out. I was fired in a way that left no fingerprints, just a vague memo about safety risks. I didn't say anything. I just picked up the cardboard box of my comic supplies I'd left under my desk, and walked out. The hallway felt a mile long. I'd lost my apartment, and now my job, all in less than 24 hours. And then I saw him. He was leaning against the drab beige wall of the government hallway as if he'd been waiting there all morning. Lucien Armand. He was in another immaculate suit, charcoal gray this time, and he was holding 2 cardboard cups of coffee. He looked completely out of place, like a panther that had wandered into a petting zoo. He held one of the cups out to me. "Latte," he said. His voice was quiet, but it echoed in the empty hall. "2 sugars. You looked like you were having a bad morning." I stopped dead. The fear from last night was back, but now it was sharper, laced with paranoia. "How did you know I was here?" I whispered, clutching my box. "How did you know how I take my coffee?" "It's my business to know things," he said, taking a sip of his own cup. "For instance, I know that the Metropolitan Fiscal Guard isn't a real government agency. It's a shell corporation, registered 3 weeks ago to a holding company in Delaware. Its primary funding comes from the Kestrel Union." I stared at him, the hot coffee cup warming my numb fingers. "The guys who smashed the pawn shop?" "The same," he confirmed. "The Shoreline Task Group you met last night, they're the muscle. The MFG is the administrative glove. Kestrel wants the harbor, wants it swept clean for their new green high-rise project. They use Shoreline to physically force people like your landlord to evict tenants. And they use the MFG to discredit and silence anyone, like a principled employee in the permit office, who might try to use the system against them. The pieces clicked into place, horrible and perfect. I had been digging into the Kestrel project's permits. I thought the foundation specs were falsified. I was about to file a report. I leaned against the wall, the world tilting. They knew. They were just waiting for me to complain about my landlord, to have a reason. "You were a loose end," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. A surge of bitter anger rose up in me. "And you, what are you? The good guy in this, your Mafia. They're a public contract, a corporation." Lucien looked down into his coffee, a flicker of something dark in his eyes. He stepped away from the wall, closer to me. "Different stamps," he said softly. "Same rubber. They just hide their ink in quarterly reports." He gestured with his head toward the elevator. "You need your things from your apartment. Marco is downstairs." I stiffened. It was one thing to be rescued in the dark. It was another to accept the help of this man in broad daylight. "No," I said, pushing myself off the wall. "I don't need your help. I can handle my own landlord." I was drawing a line. I was trying to reclaim one tiny piece of my life. I walked past him, punched the elevator button, and didn't look back. I rode the bus back to my apartment building, my knuckles white on the grip of my box. I was going to get my art portfolio and my mother's picture, and then I was going to disappear. The bus pulled up to my street. My stomach dropped. The front gate wasn't just locked, it was chained, with a thick industrial-grade padlock. A bright, lurid yellow notice was plastered on it. "Emergency D placement, structural hazard condemned." No, he can't." I heard a crash. It came from the alley. I ran, my box slamming against my hip, and I saw it. My landlord, Petrovich, was standing there with a clipboard, smirking. 2 large men I didn't recognize were tossing my life into a rusted, open-top dumpster. My drawing table, splintered, my clothes, my books. A box labeled comics burst open on impact, scattering pages. "Stop!" I screamed, dropping my box. "That's my property. You can't do this." Petrovich just laughed. "Buildings condemned. Sweetheart, read the sign. Everything in it is hazardous waste. I'm doing the city a favor." One of the men picked up a framed photograph. It was my mother. He drew his arm back to throw it. "Don't you touch that!" I lunged, but he just shoved me back. I stumbled, falling onto a pile of trash bags. "That's enough." Lucien's voice. I looked up. The black Halcyon 12 was parked silently at the end of the alley. Lucian was walking toward us. He wasn't hurrying. He didn't look angry. He just looked tired. Petrovich's smirk vanished. "This is private property. You need to—" Lucian ignored him completely. He took out his phone. He made one call. "Brimstone and Laurel. Please," he said. "Yes, connect me to Mr. Vance. Tell him I'm at 1412 Harbor Street. I am witnessing an illegal eviction, property destruction and assault. Yes, send the compliance team. Now." He hung up. Petrovich scoffed. "Brimstone and who you calling your lawyer? I've got a city order. Pal." Less than 5 minutes passed. A matte black van pulled into the alley, blocking the dumpster. The side was lettered in discreet silver Brimstone and Laurel, private compliance and mediation. 2 people. A man and a woman in sharp, dark suits got out. They weren't carrying weapons. They were carrying high-definition video cameras and digital recorders. "We're documenting the scene," the woman said in a crisp, clear voice as she began filming Petrovich's face. "Please state your name and your authority for this property removal." The man was filming the dumpster, my belongings, the fake notice, my fall. Petrovich turned a blotchy red. "Now, wait a minute, I'm the owner." I was shaking, trembling with a mixture of rage and humiliation. I got to my feet, my knees raw, but I didn't cry. I stood tall and stared Petrovich down. Lucian finally walked over to the landlord. He stood very close. He spoke, his voice so low I couldn't hear the words, only the cold, steady cadence. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement. He spoke for perhaps 30 seconds. He pointed one clean finger at the dumpster, then at the apartment door. I watched Petrovich's face go from red to white to a sickly, mottled gray. He snapped at the 2 men. "Stop, what are you doing? Are you crazy? Get that stuff out of there? Put it back, put it all back." Carefully. The men looked confused, but one glance at Lucian, who was now just watching them silently, made them jump into action. They started pulling my life back out of the trash. Lucian gently took my elbow. "They will put everything in a secure storage unit. Marco will oversee it." He guided me away from the scene, away from the whirring cameras and the stammering apologies of my landlord. He put me in the car. We didn't drive to the hotel. He took me to the Salt Line Diner, an old 24-hour joint on the edge of the district, all chrome and cracked vinyl booths. It was normal. It was real. We sat in a booth by the window. The waitress brought us coffee. I hadn't let go of the ring. It was still clutched in my fist. We sat in silence for a long time. Just the clatter of plates from the kitchen. "You were right," I finally said, and my voice hoarse. I opened my hand and stared at the gold falcon. "About my troubles. They're not gone." He stirred his coffee. "Not yet. You laughed at my ring," he said, not looking at me. "That was good. It deserved to be laughed at." He finally raised his eyes to mine. The gray was deep, like the ocean floor. "It used to be a handcuff, a symbol of loyalty to a man I never wanted to become, a promise I never wanted to make." The vulnerability in that statement hit me harder than the shove in the alley. It was the first real, unguarded thing he'd said. "Why?" I asked. "Why are you doing this?" "You don't know me. This isn't your fight. The Kestrel Union and we disagree on how this city should be run," he said, leaning forward just an inch. "But that's not why." His gaze was intense. "I hate watching the strong use a rubber stamp to eat the weak's dinner. Your landlord uses a city seal. Kestrel uses the MFG. It's all the same appetite. You just happened to be the one who saw the fork." I drank my coffee. It was hot and bitter. I felt not safe, but grounded. I had nothing. No apartment, no job, just a box of damaged comics and a Mafia boss's ring. "I can't go back to the hotel," I said. "Where do you need to go?" "I have a studio, an hourly rental, over on West 3rd. I need to draw. It's the only thing I have left." "Marco will take you," he said, signaling for the check. We stood up. I slid out of the booth, and he stood to let me pass. "Okay," I said, meeting his gaze. The diner's fluorescent lights caught the complex planes of his face. "I'll accept the ride, and the help with my apartment, but it's not free." A flicker of that same interest from the pawn shop, an almost smile. "Oh, when we get there, you're going to tell me the truth." I tapped my hoodie pocket, where the ring now sat, heavy as a promise and a threat. "You're going to tell me what this ridiculous piece of gold really means." He held my gaze for a beat longer. "Done." The Halcyon 12 cut through the Port Halcyon night, a silent blade of black steel. Marco drove with an unnerving smoothness, never hitting a red light, never drawing attention. Lucian sat beside me in the back, the space between us charged with an energy that felt like it was humming just below the frequency of hearing. We pulled up on West 3rd in a gritty industrial block where the warehouses hadn't yet been converted into $1,000-a-month lofts. My studio was on the 4th floor of one, a single room I rented by the hour, smelling of ink, turpentine, and old wood. It was the only place I had left. Marco stayed with the car. Lucian followed me up the creaking freight elevator, his expensive leather shoes silent on the dusty floorboards. I flicked on the switch. A string of bare yellow bulbs illuminated the space. It was chaos. Stacks of newsprint, half-finished canvases, jars of brushes, and my drafting table, which was the room's only real furniture. It was my chaos. Lucian stood in the center of the room, turning slowly. His gray suit was an anomaly here, a splash of stark, corporate order in my messy, creative haven. He didn't criticize. He just observed. "You promised me the truth," I said, dropping my box of salvaged art supplies onto a stool. My voice was raw. "I did. About the ring." I pulled it from my hoodie pocket. The gold falcon felt heavy in my palm. I needed to do something with my hands, or I'd start shaking again. I walked to the drafting table, clipped on a fresh sheet of heavy stock paper, and picked up a stick of graphite. I started to draw. The sound of the graphite scratching the paper was the only sound in the room. I drew the alley. I drew the dumpster overflowing with my belongings. I drew the leering, smirking face of my landlord. And then, looming over all of it, I drew a massive, skeletal crane, its hook dangling over the entire scene, on its side. I sketched the Kestrel Union logo. Lucian had moved, and I didn't even hear him. He was standing just behind my shoulder, watching the image take shape. "You draw the things that are trying to swallow us," he said, his voice quiet. I stopped, my hand hovering. I turned on the high stool to face him. He was closer than I thought. "Now, the truth," I demanded. He looked from the drawing to the ring in my hand. "It's the Armand signet," he said. "My great-grandfather had it forged in the old country. It was a different time." "A gangster movie," I whispered, echoing my own words from the pawn shop. "Yes," he said, without a trace of irony. "For him, and for my father, it was a symbol, a promise. It meant blood for blood. It meant you protected the family, and you destroyed its enemies. It was a chain, forged of loyalty and violence. And for you," his gaze was heavy, "for me, it was the handcuff I told you about, a legacy I never wanted. For years, I wore it as a reminder of what I was fighting against. Now," he looked at me, "now, it's just a promise to keep boundaries, to maintain order, to ensure that the strong don't eat the weak's dinner." The air was thick with everything unsaid. The room felt small, suffocating. I needed to break the spell. I slid off the stool and crossed to my small, batter-powered speaker. I pressed play. A low, smoky jazz trumpet filled the room, a saxophone mournfully answering. It was old, sad, and slow. I turned back, and he was watching me, his expression unreadable. I felt a sudden, reckless impulse, a need to see if this man, who was all angles and control and quiet power, was even real. "You're a long way from your world, Mr. Armand," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "So are you, Miss Delgado." He took a step, then another. He didn't ask. He just put one hand on my waist, lightly, his other hand finding mine. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, and I didn't pull away. We started to move. It wasn't really a dance. It was a slow sway, two magnets drawn together by a force neither of us understood. moving to the rhythm of a lonely trumpet. The purple neon sign from the bar across the street pulsed through my dirty window, bathing us in alternating light and shadow. His hand was warm on the small of my back, a solid point of heat through my hoodie. I could feel the lean strength of him. I rested my free hand on his shoulder, on the immaculate wool of his suit. I could smell the faint, clean scent of expensive soap and something like cold night air. I looked up. His face was all shadows, but his eyes were fixed on mine. The music seemed to fade, the city noises, the sirens, the distant harbor foghorns, they all disappeared. There was only the sound of our breathing. We stopped moving. We were just standing in the middle of my studio, in the purple light, holding each other. My heart was doing a slow, heavy thud, thud, thud against my ribs. I could feel his steady and strong against my chest. He wasn't rushing. This wasn't a conquest. It was a surrender. He lowered his head. I rose on my toes. The first kiss wasn't a spark. It was a slow burn. It was gentle, almost tentative, and it lasted for an eternity. It was a question and an answer. It was his lips, surprisingly soft, learning the shape of mine, my hand, which had been resting on his shoulder, clenched, gripping the fabric. We broke apart, but only for air. My forehead rested against his. I could feel the dampness in my hair, a cold sweat from the day's terror and the sudden, overwhelming heat of this moment. His thumb stroked my cheek, a feather-light touch that sent a shiver all the way down my spine. "Ren," he whispered. It was the first time he'd said my name like that. The second kiss was different. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. It was deep and sure. And it burned. It was the exhaustion of the last 24 hours, the fear from the alley, the rage at my landlord, all of it melting away, being replaced by this one, undeniable, solid thing. My other hand came up, framing his face. His suit jacket was a barrier, an armor. I don't know if I tugged at it or if he shrugged it off, but it slid from his shoulders and landed with a soft, expensive sound on the stool behind him. Now it was just the thin cotton of his shirt. I could feel the warmth of his skin, the hard muscles of his back as my hands slid over them. We stumbled back, pressing against the drafting table. Pencils and charcoal sticks rattled and fell to the floor, but neither of us noticed. The kiss went on, deep and consuming, a silent conversation in a language I'd never spoken but suddenly understood perfectly. It was a promise of protection. It was a plea for refuge. It was dangerous. And it was the only safe thing I'd felt all day. When we finally, slowly drew apart, I was breathless. The jazz was still playing, but it sounded a long way off. I looked at him, the man in the $1,000 shirt, in my $10 an hour studio. The reality of it crashed into me. "I'm afraid," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. His eyes searched mine. "Of Kestrel. Of this," I said, gesturing between us. "Of being manipulated. Of this just being another tool, another way to control a situation. You're a man who controls things. Lucian." He didn't deny it. He didn't lie. He just lifted his hand and gently pushed a strand of hair back from my face. "I will never lie to you, Ren," he said, his voice low and rough. "And I will never force you to do anything. I deal in power, yes, but I also deal in promises." He held my gaze, his own intense and absolute. "The day you say stop, I stop. That is my promise." Before I could answer, my phone buzzed on the drafting table. It vibrated against a metal ruler, the sound unnaturally loud. I flinched. Lucian's expression hardened, the softness of the last few minutes evaporating, replaced by the cold. Assessing man from the diner. I picked it up. A text from an anonymous number. It was a link to the Port Halcyon Civic Conclave's public calendar. Below it, one line of text. "Don't show up. You'll regret it." I must have gone pale, because Lucian took the phone from my hand. He read the message. "The Harbor Project hearing," he stated. "It's tomorrow." I stared at him. How did you know? It's the only reason they would be this desperate to silence you. He handed the phone back. You're scheduled to speak, aren't you? Yes, as a private citizen. And I was going to bring my findings from the permit office, the falsified foundation reports I found before they locked me out. They know, he said simply. They've taken your job. They've taken your home. Now they are warning you away from the public stage. He wasn't telling me what to do. He wasn't forbidding me. He was just waiting. They'll be there, he said. The Kestrel Union, they'll have men in the audience. They will try to discredit you, to humiliate you. They already have, I said, my voice shaking, but a new, cold anger hardening it. They've taken everything. They can't take this. I straightened up, pulling the last of my courage around me like a shield. I'm going to speak. He nodded once, a sharp, quick gesture of approval. If you go, I go behind you. The promise hung in the air. I looked at him, the fear churning in my stomach, but my resolve set. I'll be terrified. My voice will probably shake, but I'll do it. I gave him a weak, shaky smile. If I start to run, I'll look for you. In the back row. I'll be there, he said. He picked up his jacket from the stool, shrugging it back on. The armor was back in place. He was the boss again. He walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the frame, and looked back. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't touch me. He just picked up the heavy gold signet ring from my table. For a heart-stopping second, I thought he was taking it back. Instead, he spotted the cheap, thin silver chain I kept looped around my desk lamp. He unhooked it, deftly threaded the heavy ring onto it, and then turned to me. May I? He asked. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He stepped close, and I tilted my head back. His fingers brushed the skin of my neck as he fastened the clasp. The ring slid down, cold and heavy, coming to rest in the hollow of my throat. It was a target, and it was a shield. Let it be yours tonight, he murmured, his thumb brushing the gold falcon one last time. Let it remind them who they're afraid of. And then he was gone. The door closed, and I was alone in the purple light, my hand clasping the weight of the Armand Signet. The floor of the Port Halcyon Civic Conclave was a sea of cheap suits, expensive suits, and television cameras. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and manufactured outrage. I'd never felt smaller. My hands were visibly shaking, and the stack of photocopied maps in my grip felt flimsy, like a child's craft project, under my blouse. The Armand Signet was a heavy, cold weight against my skin, a constant reminder of the promise I'd made and the man I'd made it with. We have a full docket. The moderator, a slick city councilman named Davies, announced, we ask that all public comments be kept to 3 minutes. I spotted them in the 3rd row, men who were too polished for this hearing, their faces impassive, their dark blazers all identically cut. They weren't press. They weren't developers. I'd seen their pins on the news, the Interstate Vice Commission, the IVC, federal observers. Why were they here? It was a local zoning hearing. Unless it wasn't. My stomach twisted. The anonymous text, "Don't show up," this was bigger than I thought. Next, Ren Delgado, Davies called, mispronouncing my last name. I walked to the podium. The lights were blinding. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, most of them bored, some of them hostile. I couldn't see the back row. I couldn't see him. My heart hammered so hard I thought the microphone would pick it up. My name is Ren Delgado. I started, my voice trembling, just as I'd predicted. I'm a resident of the Harbor District, or I was, until I was illegally evicted. I'm also an employee of the county permits office on forced leave. A murmur went through the crowd. The cameras, which had been half asleep, swung toward me. I'm here because the Kestrel Union's green high-rise project, the one this council is about to fast-track, is based on a foundation of lies. And I have proof. I placed my first map on the overhead projector. This is the official use-only plot map for the district. And this, I overlaid a copy of Kestrel's submitted permit application. This is what they submitted. They falsified over 40% of the load-bearing data. They're planning to build a 50-story tower on land zoned for 5. That's a serious allegation. Miss Delgado, Councilman Davies interrupted, his smile tightening. One I'm sure the developers' engineers can... I'm not finished, I said, a new strength in my voice. I was done being polite. I found these discrepancies weeks ago. When I tried to file a report, I was shut down, but I kept digging, and I found this. I held up one of the falsified permits to the light. Every single one of the fake applications, they have a watermark, a seal. It's almost invisible. I call it the iris seal, because of its shape. Davies was on his feet. Miss Delgado, your time is up. This is not the forum for unsubstantiated... He made a cutting gesture to the technician's booth. My microphone went dead, a high, sharp feedback whine, and then silence. I was standing there, in the hot light, completely silenced. The crowd began to rustle. Confused, Davies smiled, a tight, thin-lipped expression of victory. I looked at him. I looked at the Kestrel union lawyers in the front row, who were smirking. I looked at the impassive faces of the IVC, and then... I did what I promised. I looked to the back of the room. He was there, just as he said he would be. Lucien Armand was leaning against the back wall, arms crossed over his chest. He was a pillar of shadow in the bright, chaotic room. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Councilman Davies. His eyes were cold, flat, and full of a terrible, patient anger. He saw me look. He didn't smile. He just gave one, slow, almost imperceptible nod. I am here. A fire lit in my chest, burning away the fear. I turned back to the podium. The mic was dead, but the cameras were still on. Their red lights were blinking. They can cut my microphone, I said, my voice rising, projecting to the room without an amp. But they can't change the facts. I pulled the silver chain from under my shirt. The heavy gold ring swung free. Catching the light, a gasp went through the front rows. It was ostentatious. It was ridiculous. It was the ring they'd laughed at in the pawn shop. This iris seal they used, I shouted. It's not just a watermark. It's a chemical trigger. I walked over to the projector, pulled my map off, and held it up for the nearest camera. I pressed the heavy, warm gold of the Armand signet against the corner of the paper, right where the faint seal was. I don't know why. Maybe it's the specific alloy. Maybe it's just the heat from a pure piece of gold. I held it there for 3 seconds, 4, 5. I pulled the ring away, where the faint, invisible iris seal had been. There was now a stark, black smear, a scorched-looking void, clear as day. Right on the paper, the room erupted. Camera flashes exploded in my face. People were standing up, shouting questions. Do it again, I pressed the ring to another seal. Again. The black mark appeared, like a chemical burn. This, I yelled over the noise, my voice finally clear and strong, is on every single fake permit. This is how they track their own fraud. If all it takes is the heat from a piece of gold to expose their books. We're not just talking about zoning violations. We're talking about a massive conspiracy to commit tax evasion. Councilman Davies was banging his gavel, his face purple. Order, order, remover. Before security could even move, a man was at my side. He was sharp, dressed in a suit almost as fine as Lucien's, with restless eyes and dark hair. I'd seen him before, and he was always in Lucien's shadow. Rafe Kincaid, Lucien's right-hand man. He didn't look at me. He pressed a plastic keycard into my hand, closing my fingers around it. Basement records room, B4, he whispered, his voice urgent, his eyes scanning the chaos. They're already shredding, but they haven't gotten to the hard copies. Go, now, trust me. I looked at him, stunned. Then I glanced back at Lucien. Lucien was no longer looking at Davies. His gaze was locked on Rafe, a look of such penetrating, glacial suspicion that it made my blood run cold. He didn't look surprised. He looked wary. The air around him crackled. I could smell it, even from across the room. Betrayal. "Hey, you're Ren Delgado!" A woman pushed through the crowd, a press badge swinging from her neck, a digital recorder in her hand. She was young, sharp and looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Nova Reyes? Port Halcyon Independent. I got that on camera, the ring, the seal. What's in the basement? I made the decision in a nanosecond. I had the key. She had the camera. You want the rest of the story? I grabbed her arm. Come with me. We didn't walk. We ran. We pushed her through the side exit, past a bewildered security guard, and found the stairwell. We pounded down 4 flights of concrete stairs, the alarm from the main hall now a dull, distant bell. B4, I panted, skidding to a halt in a long, fluorescent-lit hallway. I swiped the card. The lock clicked green. We burst in. The room was huge, cold, and smelled of old paper and dust. Miles of rolling metal shelves, packed with cardboard file boxes. How do we find it? Nova asked. Already filming the room. Kestrel, Shoreline. Look for the Harbor Project. We split up. I found it in the back corner, an entire section. Shoreline Task Group, Eviction Reports, Harbor. Kestrel, Acquisitions, Harbor. Here, I yelled. I grabbed the nearest box, tore open the lid. It was full of files, tenant complaints, eviction notices, all stamped with the real city seal, and stapled to the back of each one a transfer receipt, a payment. Nova, look, I pulled one out. They weren't just evicting, they were buying, no, they were seizing the properties through Shoreline, using the city as a shield, then transferring the deeds to Kestrel for $1. Nova was filming over my shoulder. This is it, Ren, this is the whole thing. Hiss! A sound from the ceiling, a spray of cold mist. What is that? Nova yelped. A sprinkler head above us exploded, then another, and another. The fire alarm began to blare, a deafening, pulsing shriek, accompanied by a flashing strobe light. Icy, foul-smelling water rained down on us. No, I screamed, shielding the files with my body, but it was useless. The cardboard boxes were melting. The ink on the papers was blurring, turning into a blue-black soup. It's a trap, Nova yelled, trying to shield her camera. They knew we were coming, Rafe. Trust me, he'd sent us right into it. We have to go, I grabbed her, pulling her toward the exit, and in the strobing, disorienting light, a dark shape lunged from behind a shelf. It wasn't Lucian. It wasn't Rafe. The figure slammed into me, not to hit me, but to grab me. A hand tangled in the front of my blouse. It wasn't looking for me. It was looking for the ring. I felt a sharp, violent tug. The thin silver chain bit into the back of my neck. No, I clawed at the hand, but it was too strong. Snap! The chain broke. The figure ripped it free. The heavy gold ring clutched in its fist. The thief was already moving, sprinting not for the door we'd entered, but for a red steel fire exit on the far wall. I heard the clang of the push bar, the thud of running feet on a metal staircase. Gone. He'd taken the ring. Ren, are you okay? Nova was shouting over the alarm. I was clutching my neck, panting, soaked and shaking. The main door to the records room slammed open. Lucian Moa. He took in the entire scene in 1/10 of a second. The blaring alarm, the flooding water, Nova with her camera, me clutching my throat, the broken chain dangling from my hand, the open, echoing fire exit. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't chase the thief. He strode across the room, his shoes splashing in the pooling water. He grabbed the handle of the steel fire door, slammed it shut, and threw the heavy mechanical deadbolt, a loud, final thunk that sealed the room. He was locking us in, protecting the scene, protecting me. He turned. The alarm was still screaming, the lights still flashing, the water still pouring. He walked toward me, his face a mask of such perfectly controlled, Arctic fury it was more terrifying than any shout. He stopped right in front of me. His eyes were on my neck, gently, almost clinically. He reached out and touched the raw, red line where the chain had snapped. His thumb came away with a single, thin smear of my blood. His eyes lifted to mine. The calm in them, finally, terrifyingly, broke. He leaned in, his voice a low, dangerous whisper that cut through the sound of the alarms and the water. I owe you 2 things now. The fire alarms in the records room were a distant echo by the time we were back in the silent, moving tomb of the Halcyon 12. The water was still dripping from my hair onto the plush leather. Nova Reyes, the reporter, sat across from us in the jump seat, clutching her camera like a life raft. Her face was pale, but her eyes were electric. Lucian was a statue of cold fury, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the rain-streaked window. "He played us," I said, my voice hoarse. The skin on my neck stung. "Rafe, he sent us into that trap. He wanted them to destroy the evidence. He wanted the ring." "He got both," Lucian said, his voice a low growl. "He didn't get this," Nova interjected. She held up her camera. "The water triggered the sprinklers, not the heat. The data card is sealed. I got it all. The files, the watermarks, your speech. It's not the hard copies, but it's enough to burn them." Lucian looked at her, his gaze assessing. "Don't release it, not yet. They've only shown their hand. We haven't seen their face." He was right. Rafe's betrayal wasn't just a simple power grab. It was calculated. He'd used me to create a diversion at the hearing, used my discovery to set a trap for the physical evidence, and used the chaos to steal the one thing he apparently needed, the ring. "But why the ring?" I asked, rubbing my neck. "If it was just about the evidence—" "It's a key," Lucian said. Nova and I both looked at him. "The marks you made on the paper, the iris seal. That wasn't a chemical reaction to gold. It was a reaction to a specific trace-level isotope embedded in the ring. The ring is a key, and you just showed them it works." He turned to Marco. "Where did the signal from the fire exit stairwell lead?" "2 blocks over, then dead," Marco replied from the driver's seat. "But the thief who grabbed the ring, he was picked up by a Kestrel car. I got the plate." "Good," Lucian said. "Cross-reference it. Find their primary warehouse, the one they don't put on their shipping manifests." It took 2 hours. 2 hours of me pacing the floor of the Orion penthouse, while Nova backed up her footage and Lucian and Marco made quiet, coded calls. "Welkin Pier," Lucian finally said, hanging up his phone. "Warehouse 7. It's their offshore staging ground." "And Rafe?" I asked. "He's there." Lucian's voice was devoid of emotion. He just sent a manifest update to Kestrel's logistics hub, authorizing an emergency inspection of container 405. It's flagged for immediate export. He's not just stealing, he's cleaning out the entire operation for them. "So we call the cops the IVC," Nova asked, grabbing her jacket. "The IVC is compromised," Lucian said, walking to a closet. "They were at the hearing to watch, not to act, and the local police won't get within a mile of Welkin Pier without a federal warrant. We're on our own." He pulled out 3 nylon bags. He tossed one to me, one to Nova. Inside were dark blue coveralls, a heavy-duty tool belt, and a white hard hat. "What's this?" I asked, holding up the hat. "Today," Lucian said, pulling his own coveralls over his suit pants. "We are inspectors from the Bureau of Urban Integrity." I almost laughed, the absurdity of it hitting me. "The BUI? You're kidding. That's my department's rival. They're the most bureaucratic, by-the-book paper pushers in the city." "Exactly," Lucian said, zipping up the front, the cheap nylon strained against his shoulders. "No one in the Kestrel Union would ever expect a BUI inspector to actually show up, especially not at 9 o'clock at night. They'll be confused, and confused is slow." Welkin Pier was a maze of steel mountains, shipping containers stacked 8 high, the air sharp with salt, rust, and diesel fumes. Marco parked the car a half-mile away, and we walked the rest. 3 dark figures in official-looking gear, Nova's camera hidden in a BUI-stamped equipment bag. Lucian moved with a confidence that was chilling. He didn't sneak. He strode onto the pier, carrying a clipboard. He nodded at the 2 guards at the gate. "Bureau of Urban Integrity," he said, his voice flat and bored. "We've got an anonymous tip on an unsealed container. 405, the guards squinted at us. It's 9 p.m. Rodents don't keep office hours," Lucian snapped, channeling every petty tyrant I'd ever worked with. "You want me to file a non-compliance report? Shut down your whole pier for 48 hours. The guard grumbled, but he waved us through. We found it. Container 405 in a dark, isolated stack. Lucian used a pair of bolt cutters from his tool belt, and the heavy steel door groaned open. The inside was not full of cargo. It was an office and a workshop. Against one wall, a high-speed industrial printer, not for paper. It was set up to print rolls of fake tax stamps, I whispered, touching one. That's what they were using the ink for. On a table, stacks of paper. The real forced transfer of deed lists, the originals, the ones I'd seen dissolving in the records room, and at the far end a safe, a large, black, industrial safe. "This is it," Nova said, her camera's red light already on, panning across the room. I walked toward the safe. It wasn't a combination lock. It wasn't a keyhole. It was a smooth, steel plate with a single, perfectly circular indentation, about the size of a man's ring. Inside the indentation, I could see a complex pattern of raised metal pins. "My God," I breathed. "It's a mechanical key. The ring, the falcon crest, it's not a design. It's a set of tumblers." "They didn't just steal a symbol," Lucian said, his voice grim. "They stole the key to their entire shadow ledger." Lucian. It was Rafe. He was standing at the container door, his face pale, his suit rumpled. "They're here," he panted, looking terrified. "Kestrel, they must have seen you. I tried to run interference, but they're sending a full crew. You have to get out." Lucian just looked at him. His expression was unreadable. "I'll check the camera feeds," Rafe said, talking too fast. "See if I can find you a clear path out the east gate. Just stay here. Stay dark." He turned and sprinted off into the container yard. Lucian didn't move for a second. Then he gave a tiny, almost invisible signal to Marco, who had been standing in the shadows by the door. A flick of his chin. Marco nodded once and melted back into the night, following Rafe. "He's lying," I whispered. "I know," Lucian said. A sound from outside, not a shout, a click, the sound of a dozen heavy-duty container locks engaging at once, and then the sound of an engine. Not a car, a crane. The world tilted. We were being lifted. Whoom! A siren blared. Not a police siren, but a piercing, industrial alarm. Floodlights snapped on, bathing the container yard in harsh, white light. Lucian was at the door, peering through the gap. "They're not just moving us, they're boxing us in." He pointed. "Kestrel crew? A dozen, maybe more. Armed." "What do we do?" Nova panicked, her camera swinging wildly. "We don't stay in the box," Lucian said. He looked up. At the top of the container, a small, square maintenance hatch for ventilation. He climbed the shelves like a ladder, pushed it open. He peered out. "We're 4 high," he called down. "They're moving us to the center of the yard." He reached down. "Ren, give me your hand." I climbed up, my heart in my throat. He pulled me through the hatch onto the cold metal roof. We were moving, swaying sickeningly as the crane carried us. Below, the yard was a swarm of men. "Nova, keep filming," Lucian ordered, pulling her up after me. He pointed to the stack next to us. It was dark. "There." "That's a 20-foot jump," I yelled over the alarm. "No," he said. "It's a 10-foot drop." He ran to the edge of our container, just as it slotted into place next to another stack. He looked down into the black canyon between them. 3 containers down, there was a heavy-duty tarpaulin, slung like a net to catch falling debris. "We drop," he said. "We'll break our legs," Nova cried. "It's canvas, not concrete." Lucian said, "It will hold. Nova, you first. Drop the bag, then drop. Go." Nova didn't hesitate. She threw her bag, and it landed on the tarp with a soft thwump. She jumped, disappearing into the darkness. Lucian turned to me. The alarms were screaming. Shouts were coming from below. "Your turn. Ren." I looked down. It was black. I couldn't even see the tarp. I was paralyzed. "Ren, look at me." I looked at him. His face was stark in the floodlights. "I will not let you fall." He didn't wait. He put one hand on my back, one on my arm, and just helped me over the edge. I didn't scream. I just fell. The drop was terrifying. My stomach shot into my throat. I hit the tarpaulin with a force that knocked the wind out of me, a jarring, painful thud that echoed through my bones. It was exactly as he said, a drop painful enough to remember, but not enough to break anything. A second later, he landed beside me, silent as a cat, absorbing the impact, already moving. He grabbed my arm, pulling me into the deepest shadows of the container stack. We were in a narrow, man-made canyon of steel. Above us, the lights. In here, darkness. I was breathing in huge, ragged gasps, the smell of canvas and rust in my nose. I was shaking. He put his hands on my shoulders, steadying me. In the almost total dark, I could just make out the line of his jaw. Ren. He leaned in, and it wasn't a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of adrenaline, of survival. He pressed his lips hard against my forehead, a brief, grounding touch. "Still think the ring is funny," he whispered, his voice rough. I let out a choked, half-sobbing laugh. My hand was still at my neck, where the chain had been. "Only if you're the one who puts it back on." A low whistle. Marco. And he was at the end of the corridor, motioning to us. Nova was already with him. We didn't run. We walked, fast and low, following him. He led us not to a gate, but to a forklift parked in a blind spot. "Nova, you and I get in the cab," Marco ordered. "Lucien, Ren, on the forks, stay low. We're going through the drainage tunnel." We crouched on the cold, greasy steel tines. Marco started the engine. It roared to life, and we drove, not toward the gate, but straight toward a concrete wall. My heart stopped. At the last second, I saw the opening. A huge, circular drainage pipe, big enough to drive a car through. Marco drove the forklift right into the darkness. The sound of the engine echoed, deafening. It smelled of low tide and old iron. We drove for 5 minutes in total blackness, until the tunnel opened up into a storm drain 2 blocks outside the pier's perimeter. We were out. We were alive. And Nova had it all. We were huddled in the alley, soaked, filthy, and buzzing. "I got it," Nova was whispering, checking her camera. "The printer, the safe, the lists. I even got Rafe's face when he came to the container. It's all here." Lucien was leaning against the wall, his phone in his hand, his thumb scrolling. He was looking for a signal. "We're not done," he said. "What's next?" I asked, my knees still weak. His phone pinged, a single, new text message. He read it. His entire body went rigid. The color drained from his face, leaving it a mask of pale, cold marble. "Lucien." He didn't answer. He just held the phone out. I read the screen. An anonymous number. One message. "Skylark Pier. Midnight. Alone. If you want her to live." The text message glowed on the screen, a beacon of malice in the damp alley. "Skylark Pier. Midnight. Alone. Come get your ring." No, it wasn't a text. It was a summons. Rafe hadn't taken a hostage. He was trying to create one. He was baiting Lucien, using the ring as the lure. "He wants to trade," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "He wants a war," Lucien corrected, his voice a flat, cold sheet of steel. He turned to Marco. "Take Miss Reyes and the footage. Secure it. Do not release it. Do not move on it until I give the word, or until 1 a.m. Whichever comes first, go." Marco nodded, his face grim. He bundled a still buzzing Nova into the Halcyon 12, and the car disappeared into the night, leaving us alone in the alley. Lucien turned to me. The fury was gone, replaced by an unnerving, absolute calm. "I will call you when it's done." He started to walk away. "No." He stopped, his back to me. "No," I said again, louder, taking a step after him. "I'm coming with you." He turned. Slowly. "You are not. He used me to get to you. He used my discoveries to set the trap. He stole the ring from me. This is my fight, Lucien. I'm in it. You don't get to bench me for the final act." "This is not a fight," he said, stepping toward me, his voice dangerously low. "It is an execution, a betrayal. It is my mess from my own house, and I will clean it. You need me," I insisted, my own anger rising. "He's not just a traitor. He's a planner. He knows how you think, but he doesn't know how I think. He thinks I'm just leverage. He'll be watching for your moves. He won't be watching for mine." He grabbed my arms. His grip was just short of painful. His eyes, in the half-light, were bottomless. "I know what he wants. Ren, he wants to trade. He wants the safe, and he'll offer me the ring in exchange for you. All the more reason for me to be there." "No," he exploded, the sound echoing off the brick. I will not walk into a negotiation with a backstabber using the person I love as collateral." The words hit the air and hung there, vibrating. The person I love. His grip on my arms went slack. His face, he looked stunned, as if he'd just confessed a crime. He had said it, out loud. He'd torn down his own walls, and he looked terrified by the rubble. I didn't let him retreat. I didn't let him apologize or take it back. I covered his hands with my own, right where they were still holding my arms. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. "Then don't," I whispered, holding his gaze. "Don't treat me like collateral. Treat me like a partner. You promised me the day I said stop. You'd stop. Don't start making decisions for me now. Lucian, don't protect me. Stand with me. I'm not a pawn. I'm going." I watched the war inside him. The boss, the protector, the man who had just admitted something he'd probably never admitted to anyone. He stared at me for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. Finally, he nodded. A single, sharp, defeated motion. "Fine, but you do exactly what I say. When I say move, you move. When I say run, you run. And when you need a new idea," I said, pulling my arms free, "you'll listen." He didn't argue. We found Marco a block away. The new plan was relayed in under a minute. We got back into the car, the warm leather a strange comfort. "He'll have the high ground," Lucian said, staring out the window as we sped toward the coast. "Skylark Pier is a tactical nightmare. It's all open. One way on, one way off. The old parking garage roof. That's where he'll be." I was still wearing the BUI tool belt, soaked and heavy. I unclipped it and dumped the contents onto the seat between us. A hammer loop, a tape measure, a roll of neon yellow reflective safety tape, a black permanent marker, and a small cardboard box of paper clips. Lucian raised a single, perfect eyebrow. "Office supplies, Ren." "I told you," I said, scooping the paper clips back into my pocket. "I work in permits. My entire world runs on paper clips and red tape. Rafe is expecting your weapons." I held up the roll of reflective tape. "He won't be expecting mine." Marco glanced at me in the rearview mirror, a flicker of something not respect, but acknowledgement. He reached into the passenger seat and passed back a heavy, worn jacket. "It's cold on the pier, Miss Delgado. Wind comes right off the water." I took it. It was an old, cracked leather flight jacket, lined with fleece. It was heavy, and it smelled faintly of engine oil and old cigarettes. It was Marco's. I slid my arms in. It was a uniform. I was in. Lucian picked up his phone. He dialed. "Nova. Change of plans. We're moving. Yes, she's with me because she's stubborn. Get your article ready. All of it. The footage from the container, the lists, the fake tax stamps, the iris seal burn kestrel, the MFG, and shoreline to the ground. If you don't hear from me by 1 a.m., 1:30 a.m., you post it. Understood good." He hung up. He looked at me. "Ready." I zipped up the jacket. "Let's go." Skylark Pier was a graveyard of fun. The skeletal remains of the roller coaster stood black against the moonless sky. The wind howled through the spokes of the rusted, silent Ferris wheel, making a low, moaning sound. Lucian was right. The parking garage was the only vantage point, 3 stories of crumbling concrete overlooking the entire boardwalk. "Marco, east perimeter," Lucian said as we got out of the car. "The old maintenance access, no signal, no move until I give it." "Understood. Boss." Lucian turned to me. "Stay in my shadow. Literally, do not make a sound." We moved. We didn't take the main stairs. Lucian led me to a utility ladder, and we climbed, emerging onto the wind-blasted roof. And there he was, Rafe Kincaid. He was standing in the middle of the roof, illuminated by the flashing red light of the dead Skylark sign. He looked like a demon in a $1,000 suit, and he was holding it. My thin silver chain. The Armand Signet dangled from it, glinting red in the flashing light. "I knew you'd come," Rafe called over the wind, a bitter, triumphant smile on his face. "And you brought her. Smart. Saves me the trouble of finding her." "You wanted me." "Rafe," Lucian said, his voice flat, carrying easily on the wind. "Here I am." "Look at this," Rafe said, holding up the ring. "The key, the legacy, the whole damn city. And I have it, but I need the safe. Lucian, the one in the container, it's locked, and Kestrel wants their assets secured." "What assets?" Lucian asked, taking a slow step forward. "The ring, obviously," Rafe said. And her, he pointed the chain at me. She's your new obsession, your weakness. They'll give me the entire harbor operation, clean. In exchange for her, they want you broken and you love her. I saw it at the conclave. I saw it in the alley, so here's the deal. He held out the ring. Give me Ren, and you get your father's trinket back. My blood turned to ice. He was going to trade me. Lucian didn't even look at me. He kept his eyes on Rafe. He took another slow step. You always were an idiot, Rafe, Lucian said, his voice almost conversational. You were my brother. I trusted you, and you overplayed your hand. I'm holding the power, Rafe shouted, his voice cracking. I have the signet, I have her. No, Lucian said. He was only a few feet away now. You're holding a chain. He held his hand out. Give it to me. Rafe, confused, defiant, held the chain out, letting the ring dangle. Take it and give me the girl. It was the fastest thing I have ever seen. Lucian's hand moved like a snake. He didn't grab the chain. His fingers, deft and sure, pinched the heavy gold ring itself. In one fluid motion, he slipped it off the broken end of the chain. Rafe was left standing there, his hand outstretched, holding a worthless piece of silver. Lucian slowly, deliberately, slid the Armand signet onto the pinky finger of his right hand. It was home. He flexed his fist. I don't sign deals based on fear, Lucian said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the rumble I'd heard in the pawn shop. And I never bargain with what's mine. For a second, Rafe just stared, his mouth open. The realization that he'd lost, that he'd been outmaneuvered, hit him, his face contorted in pure, unadulterated rage. You bastard, he screamed. He didn't lunge for Lucian. He lunged for his pocket. He pulled out a small, black remote. You think I didn't have a backup plan? He jammed his thumb down on the button. I heard a whir and a click from the gantry above me. Before I could even look up, a heavy nylon strap connected to a steel cable snaked down. A heavy-duty hook on the end caught the tool belt I was wearing, snagging it fast. Lucian, I screamed, as I was yanked hard off my feet. I hit the gravel roof, my body scraping as the winch began to pull me backward. Ren! Lucian roared. Rafe was laughing, a high, hysterical sound. She's my ticket. Lucian, she's my way out. I was being dragged, fast, toward the edge of the roof. Lucian didn't hesitate. He pulled the multi-tool from his pocket, the one he'd used on the container. He flipped the serrated blade open. He lunged, not at Rafe, but at the nylon strap that was pulling me. Rafe tackled him. They went down in a tangle of limbs, punching and struggling. No, I screamed, scrabbling for purchase. I was at the edge. The 3-story drop to the concrete pier was just inches away. Lucian threw Rafe off him with a desperate surge of strength. He scrambled forward on his hands and knees, grabbed the taut nylon strap and sawed at it. Once, twice. The strap snapped. The tension released so violently that it threw me backward, over the edge. I didn't even have time to scream. I just fell. The wind rushed past me. I saw the concrete. I saw the water. I saw my life ending. Crunch. I hit something, not concrete. It was canvas. Piles and piles of it. It was a brutal, bone-jarring, air-expelling impact that sent pain shooting up my spine. But it wasn't pavement. I was tangled in musty, padded tarps, the fireworks cushions from the outline, the stored padding for the pier's defunct 4th of July show. I was alive. My chest ached. I couldn't breathe, but I was alive. Above me, I heard the sounds of a desperate fight, grunts, the thud of fists. I had to get Marco. I rolled off the pile, my legs shaking. I was in a dark storage area under the garage. I saw it. A large, gray metal box on the wall, the main junction for the pier's lighting. A heavy, black safety switch. I staggered to it. My tool belt, it was still on me. I fumbled in my pocket. My fingers closed around the cold, thin metal. A paper clip. I jammed it between the contacts of the switch, forcing the connection, shorting the circuit. The main lights on the pier flashed. On, off, on, off. I did it again. Short, 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 long, 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 short, 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 S-O-S. I slumped against the wall, panting, every part of my body screaming in pain. Find me. Marco? The S. Oh, hiss, flashed against the concrete. A desperate, silent scream. Short, 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 long, 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 short, short, short. I heard Marco's feet on the gravel before I saw his flashlight beam. Miss Delgado? His voice was tight with controlled panic. He found me crumpled against the junction box. My body one giant, screaming bruise from the fall. He didn't ask questions, just slung my arm over his shoulder and half carried, half dragged me out from under the garage. The night air was cold. The sound of the fight above us had stopped. Lucian emerged from the stairwell. He wasn't running. He was walking. He was alone. His knuckles were split and bleeding. His shirt was torn at the collar, and the immaculate suit jacket was gone. But his eyes were as cold and calm as a winter ocean. He'd put the signet ring back on his finger. "He's gone," Lucian said, his voice flat. He looked at my shaking form, his gaze lingering on the torn tool belt Rafe had used to pull me over the edge. He ran. Let him. He picked up his phone. It was almost 1 a.m. He dialed Nova. "Post it," he said, his voice void of all emotion. "Burn them to the ground." By the time the sun rose over Port Halcyon, the city was on fire. Nova hadn't just posted the video, she had created an inferno. The hashtag Harbor Heist was the #1 trending topic in the entire country. Her site showed it all. The grainy, terrifying footage from inside the container. The high-speed printer spitting out rolls of fake tax stamps. Crystal-clear close-ups of the forced transfer lists and the piece de resistance, a clip of Rafe Kincaid, Lucien Armand's right-hand man, standing at the door, his face pale and treacherous. Seconds before the alarms went off, the media lost its mind. My old office, the Bureau of Urban Integrity, was first to crack. They held a press conference at 8 a.m., and their spokesperson looked like he was about to be physically ill. They issued a panicked, rambling statement about internal reviews and rogue agents. By 10 a.m., the Federal Commerce Integrity Office, the real feds, the FCIO hit the Shoreline Task Group's downtown office like a battering ram. News helicopters filmed agents carrying servers and boxes out of the building. It was beautiful. Righteous chaos. For a few hours, it felt like we had won. Kestrel's counterattack came at noon. It wasn't a thug. It wasn't a threatening text. It was a knock on the door of the Orion penthouse. A pale, nervous-looking man in a cheap suit handed me an envelope. "Ren Delgado, you've been served." It was a federal subpoena. Kestrel wasn't running. They were doubling down. Their legal team had spent the night fabricating an entire alternate narrative. By the time I was sitting in a sterile, windowless interrogation room at the FCIO field office at 3 p.m., I was no longer the whistleblower. I was the prime suspect. "So, Miss Delgado," said the lead agent, a woman named Chen with eyes that missed nothing. "Let's go over this again. You claim you were forced on leave, but your supervisor, Mr. Henderson, signed an affidavit this morning. It states you were fired for cause, specifically for gross negligence and unauthorized access of secure permit files." She slid a file across the table. My stomach turned to lead. It was a stack of permit applications, the same ones I had flagged, but they were different. They were marked with my digital signature. They were covered in fake correction stamps, all of them bearing my unique permit office ID. Kestrel was claiming I was the one falsifying the documents, that I was a disgruntled employee trying to frame them, and that I'd partnered with a known criminal element, Lucien Armand, to do it. It was brilliant. It was airtight. My word against my boss's sworn, terrified testimony. "This is a lie," I whispered, my hands flat on the table. "This is fabricated." "That's what you keep saying," Agent Chen said, leaning back. "But Kestrel's lawyers provided these originals, and you, Miss Delgado, are the only common denominator. We've got nothing on Kestrel. We've got a mountain of paper on you." The door opened. Lucien walked in. He wasn't supposed to be in here. "I'm Mr. Armand," he said, placing a business card on the table. "I'm Miss Delgado's private counsel." Agent Chen looked at the card, then at him. "This card just says Armand Syndicate. That's not a law firm. It's an advisory group," Lucien said smoothly. and I'm advising you that your entire case is based on the evidence my client's accusers chose to give you." He sat down next to me. He placed his right hand on the table, next to the falsified files. The gold signet ring seemed to suck all the light from the room. "My client has mentioned something you might find interesting," he said, his voice calm. "The iris seal. You have the originals of Kestrel's evidence. Correct, the ones they've been using to file their permits." Agent Chen, intrigued despite herself, nodded. "We do." "Get them," Lucian said, "and get a camera. The one you're using to record this interview will be fine." 5 minutes later, the table was covered with Kestrel's real permit applications, the ones that had been fast-tracked. "They're clean," Chen said. "Are they?" I asked. My voice was shaking, but not with fear, with rage. I looked at the camera in the corner. The Kestrel Union and their partners in Shoreline use a special thermal reactive ink to track their fraudulent documents. They call it the iris seal. It's invisible almost. I took the styrofoam cup of hot coffee an agent had given me. I dipped my finger in it, wincing at the heat. Then I pressed my hot fingertip to the corner of one of the documents. Nothing. "As I said," Agent Chen started. "It's not just heat," Lucian interrupted, his voice a low purr. "It's a specific thermal profile, the alloy in my ring." He slid the heavy gold ring from his finger. He held it in his palm, closed his fist, and rubbed it for 10 seconds, warming the metal with his own body heat. Then he handed it to me. "Ren," he said. I took the ring. It was heavy and intensely warm. I looked at Agent Chen. "Watch." I pressed the face of the falcon crest, the key, directly onto the corner of the first clean document. I held it there. 1, 2, 3. I lifted it. A perfect, scorched black smear appeared on the paper. Agent Chen shot forward in her chair. What did you do?" "I'll do it again," I said. I moved to the next file. Pressed the ring, lifted another black mark, and the next, and the next. "My God," the other agent whispered. "They're all marked." "They didn't just frame me," I said, my voice vibrating with the words. "They used their own internal system to do it, and they were so arrogant. They gave you the very evidence that could destroy them." The FCIO didn't just leak the new information. They held a press conference. The footage from the interrogation room, the ring, the seals, the black marks went global. The public tide didn't just turn, it became a tsunami. Harbor Heist and Iris Seal were plastered on every news ticker. Kestrel was hemorrhaging. We were in an emergency session in federal court by 10 a.m. the next day. We were petitioning for an immediate warrant to seize and open the safe in container 405 at Welkin Pier. Kestrel's lead lawyer, a man named Harrison with a silver mane and a reptilian smile, was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is absurd. We are being tried by hashtag and innuendo. The FCIO has been duped by a disgruntled employee and her mobster boyfriend. This magic ring," he waved his hand dismissively, "it's a theatrical prop, a cheap magic trick with some ink and gold, designed to create a media circus. There is zero legal precedent." "You're right." I stood up. The whole courtroom went silent. Lucian, next to me, didn't move. "I'm sorry, Miss Delgado," the judge asked. "He's right, Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and carrying to the back wall. "It is a theatrical prop. It's a key, the prop I have, the lock they have, in a safe at Welkin Pier. If it's all just a cheap magic trick, Mr. Harrison, then you won't mind if the FCIO brings that safe here and we perform the trick for the court, will you? Unless, of course, you're worried about what's inside." Harrison's smile froze. He was trapped. He'd called my bluff, and I'd just raised him the whole pot. The judge looked at him. "Mr. Harrison," Harrison stammered. "Your Honor, that's proprietary private." "Motion granted," the judge said, banging his gavel. "The FCIO is hereby authorized to seize and open the safe designated in container 405. We won. The courtroom exploded. Rafe Kincaid, wherever he was, had just heard his death sentence. He was cornered. He had lost the public. He had lost the legal fight. All he had left was violence. We were in the hallway, a phalanx of grim-faced FCIO agents assembling, getting ready to hit the pier. The air was electric. Lucian pulled me aside, into a small alcove, away from the chaos. His face was intense. The victory in the courtroom already forgotten. He was focused on the next step. "When this is over," he said, his voice so low I could barely hear him. "When that safe is open, and they are all gone, I am going to take this ring off." He touched the gold on his finger. "Not as a bond," he whispered, his eyes locked on mine, raw and vulnerable. "But to ask you if I can stay. Without it, without the syndicate, just me." My heart, which had been pounding with adrenaline, just stopped. I looked at this impossible man, the boss, the killer, the protector, the man who had just offered to burn his own empire down for a chance to be with me. I put my hand on his chest. I could feel his heart beating, fast and steady, under my palm. "Over or not, Lucian," I said, my voice soft, but just as unyielding as his. "The choice is mine. The ring doesn't decide. You don't decide. I do." He searched my face, and for the first time he smiled, a real, small, unguarded smile. "I know." His phone buzzed. He looked at it. His face hardened. "Marco," he said. "He found him. Rafe. He's at the Garnet Yards, an old abandoned rail yard." He looked at me. "At the FCIO team, now strapping on tactical vests. We were at the split. I have to go with them," I said, nodding toward Agent Chen. "I'm the only one who can identify the contents of that safe. I'm the one who can testify that the files are the same ones from the container." "I know," he said. "He was going after the betrayal. I was going after the truth." He leaned in, and it wasn't a kiss. It was a promise. He pressed his forehead against mine, just for a second, breathing in. "End this, Ren," he whispered. "Come back to me," I whispered back. He turned, and he was gone. I turned to Agent Chen, zipping up the blue FCIO vest she handed me. "Let's go open a box." My part of the war was loud. Theirs was silent. The FCIO convoy hit Welkin Pier like a military invasion. We didn't sneak. We rolled in with 20 agents, armored vests, and a warrant that could stop a train. The Kestrel guards at the gate didn't even raise their hands. They just dropped their clipboards and backed away. The yard was a chaotic mess from the night before, but container 405 was still there, a solitary steel box, mocking us. "Agent Chen, the safe is inside," I said, my voice tight. I was all business. The fear and the fall from the pier pushed down, replaced by a cold, sharp need to finish this. They didn't bother with the lock. They brought a heavy lift crane, the same kind that had tried to trap us. With a groan of tortured metal, they ripped the entire container from the stack and set it on the ground. A safecracker, a quiet man in glasses, went to work on the black steel box while I stood watch, my heart hammering a rhythm against the borrowed FCIO vest. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. "Lucian," my hands were shaking. I stepped away from the agents into the relative quiet of the container's shadow. I answered, "Lucian, did you find him? Are you—" Silence. But the call was connected. I didn't hear his voice. I heard wind, the high, lonely sound of wind whistling through metal, and a distant, mournful train horn. "Lucian," I whispered, my blood turning to ice. "Lucian, talk to me." Then I heard another voice. Not his. It was Rafe. His voice was thin, carried on the wind, laced with a bitter, sneering triumph. Well, look at you. The king come to his junkyard. I knew you'd come for me, Lucian. You always had to clean up your own messes." I pressed the phone so hard to my ear it hurt. I could hear Lucian's breathing, low and steady. He was there. He was just listening. "You chose her." Rafe spat, the sound of gravel crunching. He was walking, circling. "You chose a broke, no-name girl from the permit office over an empire. Over me, your brother. You were never my brother." Lucian's voice. It was deep, calm, and utterly final. "You were just a shadow I mistook for a friend." "I gave you everything," Rafe screamed, his voice cracking. "I saved your life in the harbor riots. You owed me. I paid that debt with trust for 10 years. Lucian replied, "You're the one who defaulted. And now you pay with her, or with this." A pause. No, you already lost her. You're just here to die. I heard a sharp, metallic click, a safety being flicked off. I almost screamed. I covered my mouth, my knuckles white. The agents behind me were shouting. The safecracker was using a drill. I was in two places at once. You're not going to shoot me, Rafe, Lucian said. Am I not? No. And then I heard it. A sound so distinct, so shocking. It stopped my breath, a faint shing of metal sliding. And then a small, heavy clack-clack as something metal hit a steel floor and rolled. The ring. He'd taken it off. You see, Lucian's voice continued, the only thing you've ever wanted, the only thing Kestrel wants is this. The ring, Rafe whispered, his voice full of sudden, greedy confusion. My father's legacy, the key, the power, here, it's yours. You're giving it to me. I'm showing you what it's worth, Lucian said. Any empire, any legacy, any piece of gold that cost me her isn't worth keeping. I heard a scramble, a grunt. Rafe hadn't shot. He'd lunged for the ring. Lucian, I screamed into the phone, forgetting myself. Miss Delgado, Agent Chen called from behind me. We're in. I ignored her. I was listening to the sounds of a desperate, ugly fight. Grunts, the heavy thud of fists on bodies, the scrape of shoes on rusty metal. The code, Rafe panted, his voice strained. It's not just the key, the code to the accounts, it's engraved inside the ring. He was frantic. This was it, the entire criminal enterprise. Lucian, don't, I shrieked, my eyes darting around me. The safe was open, the heavy steel door was swung wide. Ren, I heard Lucian's voice, strained, breathless. He was in the middle of the fight. The safe, Agent Chen was saying, pulling out files. It's all here, ledgers. Transfer receipts, my God. It's a list of payoffs, judges. City council. I ignored it all. I looked inside the safe, my eyes searching, desperate, not at the files, at the safe door itself. And I saw it. On the inside of the heavy steel door, not on the ring, was a small 3x5-inch brass plate. Stamped into it, clean and clear, was a long alphanumeric string, a backup, the final failsafe. Lucian, he's wrong, I screamed into the phone, reading the plate. It's not on the ring. It's in the safe. I have it. I have it right here. I heard Rafe let out a howl of pure, animal despair. You want the code, Rafe! I shouted, my voice breaking with a wild, hysterical triumph. You want the key to the kingdom. Here it is. It's Alpha Tango 779er Kilo Bravo. I kept reading. Just a string of meaningless numbers and letters, my voice getting louder and louder, echoing across the pier, echoing down the phone line into a rail yard somewhere across town. The sound of the fight had stopped. You, Rafe was breathing, a ragged, broken sound. You bitch, it's over, I heard footsteps, running, fast, desperate, and retreating. Then whoosh, a sudden, bright flare of sound. Lucian, I whispered. The phone was just static and wind. Lucian, what was that? He didn't answer for a second. I heard him take a single, deep, shuddering breath. A flare, he finally said, his voice rough. He's calling his dogs. Kestrel. They're on their way. Are you hurt? No. A pause. I heard him bend down. The faint jingle of metal. He had picked up the ring. I was crying now. Silent tears of relief and terror streaming down my face. Lucian, the agents are here. We have everything. The safe is open. It's over. Almost, he said. I heard his footsteps. 1, 2, then a loud splash. A deep, final, unmistakable sound. What was that? I asked, my heart seizing. What did you just do? The line was silent for a beat. Just the wind. Lucian, I chose you, he said, and the line went dead. I chose you. The line went dead. A splash. He had thrown it away. The ring, the signet, the key, the legacy. He had thrown it all into a bucket of water in a dead-end rail yard. He's alone, I whispered, my fingers clutching the phone. Agent Chen. She was over by the now open safe, her team methodically bagging and tagging the ledgers of corporate malfeasance that would burn Kestrel to the ground. Miss Delgado, we have it. We have everything. You have paper, I shouted, my voice cracking. I ran over to her, grabbing her arm. Rafe set off a flare. Kestrel is on their way to Garnet Yards right now. Lucien Armand is there, alone. He's the only one who can testify that Rafe was the link. If Kestrel gets to him, your entire case against their leadership dissolves. Chen's eyes went cold and calculating. She saw the logic. Garnet Yards. You know where that is. I've permitted every inch of it. I said, get in the car. She didn't hesitate. She barked orders. Team Alpha, secure the evidence. Secure the container, Team Bravo. With me. We're moving. The drive was a blur of sirens and adrenaline. I was in the lead FCIO vehicle with Chen, my knuckles white on the dashboard. He's not a fighter. Not really, I found myself saying. More to myself than to her. He's a boss. He controls. He doesn't brawl in rail yards. He'd better learn fast, Chen said, her jaw tight. We screeched to a halt at the gate of Garnet Yards. The sky was still pulsing with the faint, dying red of Rafe's flare. And we heard them. The low rumble of heavy-duty engines. FCIO, hands in the air, Chen was out. Weapon drawn, a wall of federal agents flanking her. But the trucks weren't stopping. Tuno, 3 black pickup trucks, Kestrel logos barely visible, barreled into the yard from another entrance. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to extract Rafe and eliminate a problem. Lucien, I screamed, jumping from the car before it had even stopped, my eyes scanning the labyrinth of rusted train cars. Ren, his voice. He was close. He emerged from between 2 massive hopper cars. He was alive. His knuckles were raw. His shirt was torn, but he was alive. His eyes found mine, wide with a furious shock. Ren, get back in the car. What are you doing here? Saving you, I yelled back, running toward him. Headlights washed over us, pinning us in their glare. A Kestrel truck. Get down, Lucien roared. He didn't run. He lunged at me, tackling me around the waist, pulling us both out of the light and into the shadow of a long, dark container. He shoved the heavy sliding door open and threw me inside. Stay in here, he panted, his back against the wall, peering out. No, Ren, for once in your life, do as you're... He stopped. He was looking at the walls. I looked, too. They were padded, thick, gray, acoustic foam, covered in tiny cone shapes. What is this? I whispered, my hand brushing the soft, sound-dampening material. Acoustic testing car. He breathed. It's soundproof. We were in a silent box, outside. I could hear the faint shouts of Chen's team and the Kestrel crew, a standoff just beginning. They have at least 12 men, Lucien whispered, his ear pressed to the crack in the door. Chen only has 6. They're outgunned, and Kestrel knows it. They're trying to flank her. I peeked over his shoulder. The yard was lit up like a movie set, massive floodlights on poles turning the night into a harsh, bleached-out day. They're too exposed, I whispered, my mind racing. I wasn't a fighter. I was a city planner. I knew infrastructure. The lights. They're running on the yard's main grid. If I can cut the power... Ren, don't even think about it. I'm not thinking. I pointed through the crack to a large, gray utility box about 50 yards away. Junction C. That's the auxiliary switch. It controls the entire east-west line of lights. If I can get to that, you'll be shot before you take 2 steps. They're not looking for me, I said. They're looking for you, and for the FCIO. Before he could argue, I slipped out the door. I didn't run. I moved like I'd seen Marco move. Low, fast, from shadow to shadow. The sound of shouting was a perfect cover. I ducked behind a stack of rusted wheels, then scrambled under a flatbed car. The junction box was 10 feet away. I took a deep breath, and I ran. I hit the side of the box, my body slamming into the metal. I fumbled for the latch. It was just a heavy, industrial handle. I grabbed the rusted lever with both hands and threw my entire body weight downward. Clang, thunk! Half the rail yard was plunged into immediate, disorienting darkness. Shouts of confusion erupted from the Kestrel team. What was that? Who hit the lights in that instant of chaos? I heard Chen's voice. FCIO, move up, move up. I was already sprinting back, diving back into the silent, padded safety of the acoustic container. Lucien pulled me in, his face a mask of disbelief and something else, something I'd never seen on him. Ah, "You are—" he started. "Efficient," I panted, my lungs burning. His phone buzzed. A text. He held it up. It was from Nova. "Drone is airborne. I'm live. Tell your friends." He clicked the link. Nova's face, small and intense on his screen. "This is Nova Reyes, streaming live for the Port Halcyon Independent." She was saying, "What you are seeing on the left of your screen is the certified evidence recovered from the Harbor Heist safe. On the right is live, high-definition drone footage from over the Garnet Yards. We're witnessing a standoff between Kestrel Union forces and the FCIO. They are on camera. The whole city is watching." Lucian and I stared on the tiny screen. We saw the God's Eye view. We saw the Kestrel team freezing, looking up at the small, buzzing drone. "She just saved all of us," I whispered. "She's a shield," Lucian said, his voice grim. "They can't shoot, not while they're live." The shouting outside changed. The Kestrel leader was calling a retreat. "Find Rafe. We're out of here. Go." Thunk. Something metallic hit the ground right outside our door. Hiss. Thick, gray smoke began to pour under the door. "Smoke grenade." Lucian coughed. "What?" Slamming the door shut. "They know we're here. They're creating cover to escape." The smoke was filling our soundproof box, acrid and choking. My eyes burned. "I can't breathe," I coughed. "My jacket." I fumbled with the old flight jacket Marco had given me. No, my tool belt. I still had it on. I ripped it open, found them. 2 standard-issue paper dust masks. "It's not for smoke, but it's better than nothing." I gasped, pressing one into his hand. We strapped them on. "Now," he said. He kicked the door open and we burst out into a suffocating, gray fog. We couldn't see anything. It was total chaos. "This way." Lucian grabbed my hand, pulling me right. "No." I yanked him back, my knowledge of the yard maps flashing in my head. "That's the main switching line. They'll be there this way, through the container corridor." I grabbed his hand and pulled him into a narrow, dark canyon between 2 long stacks of containers. The smoke was thinner here. We stopped, our backs pressed to the cold steel, our chests heaving. We were alone. The shouting was distant. The world was muffled. It was just the 2 of us, back to back, breathing through the thin paper, our hearts hammering in unison. The adrenaline was so sharp it tasted like tin. He spoke, his voice low, muffled by the mask. "If we survive this, Ren." I held my breath, listening, my back pressed hard against his. "I have a question to ask you." I closed my eyes, the smoke stinging them even here. "Just survive this, Lucian." A new sound cut through the fog, a heavy, hydraulic groan, the sound of a heavy-duty engine turning over. The crane. We ran out of the corridor just as the smoke began to clear. Rafe. He was high above us, in the cab of the massive gantry crane at the edge of the yard. He was trapped. Agent Chen and her team were at the base, cutting off his only escape. He saw them. He let out a roar of pure, cornered animal rage. He wasn't trying to escape. He was looking up. The massive spreader hook high above began to move, whirring, positioning itself over a single 40-ton container. "What's he doing?" I breathed. "He's not running," Lucian said, his face grim. "He's making a point." The hook locked onto the container. The crane swung it out, positioning it perfectly directly above Agent Chen and her team. "He's going to drop it," I whispered in horror. "He's going to take them all with him." I didn't think. I ran. Ren, no. I ran for the yellow maintenance ladder on the crane's leg. Rafe was in the cab, high above, his face contorted, his hands on the controls. He was focused on the ground team. He didn't see me. "Rafe," Lucian shouted from below. A perfect distraction. Rafe looked down, his face a mask of hate. That's when I reached the platform. I scrambled over the edge, the control panel, the big, red, mushroom-shaped emergency stop. I slammed my fist onto it. It didn't budge. It was jammed with grease and rust. Rafe laughed, a high, thin sound. The locks on the container groaned, disengaging. He was dropping it. I had no time. My pocket, the marker. I ripped the black marker from my pocket. I yanked the cap off. I didn't try to press the button again. I jammed the entire pen, cap first, into the narrow gap under the stuck red button. Then I slammed my fist on it one more time. The plastic of the pen snapped, but it gave me the leverage. the button depressed with a heavy, final click, clang. The entire crane froze, the power to the hoist cut. The container just hung there, swaying gently, a 40-ton angel of death, held by a thread. Rafe smashed his fists against the cab's safety glass, screaming it was over. FCIO agents swarmed the ladder. Rafe didn't fight. When they opened the cab door, he just sat there. His hands limp, he was empty. They put him in cuffs, the quiet click, click, click of the ratchet. The only sound, the Kestrel team, leaderless and exposed by Nova's drone, was on the ground, hands behind their heads. It was finished. I climbed down the ladder, my legs feeling like jelly. Every muscle in my body was shaking. Lucian was at the bottom, waiting, and just as my feet touched the gravel, the sky, which had been threatening all night, finally opened, a cold, hard, cleansing rain began to fall. It washed the smoke from the air and the grime from our faces. I stood in front of him. He was soaked in seconds, his torn shirt plastered to his skin, the blood on his knuckles finally washing away. He wasn't the boss. He wasn't the kingpin. He was just a man, standing in the rain, looking utterly, completely bewildered. He had thrown away an empire, and he was still alive. "I've never," he started, his voice rough. He looked at me, and all the walls were gone. "I've never chosen like this." I didn't answer. I just stood there with him, the rain washing the city clean, and for the first time since I'd walked into that pawn shop, I finally let myself breathe. The rain that had washed the Garnet Yards clean was still a fresh, ozonic memory as I stood in the back of the Port Halcyon Civil Courthouse. It wasn't a trial. It was a press conference. But it felt like a verdict. The room was packed, standing room only. Every camera crew in the state was here, their lights hot and blinding. In the front rows, I didn't see lawyers. I saw the people from my neighborhood, Mrs. Sanchez, who had been facing eviction from the apartment she'd lived in for 30 years, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, who had been forced out with their 2 kids. They were all here, clutching printed copies of Nova's Harbor Heist articles. Agent Chen, in her sharpest suit, stood at the podium, following an extensive investigation in cooperation with local whistleblowers, she said, her voice crisp. The Federal Commerce Integrity Office is unsealing a 72-count indictment against the Kestrel Union, the Shoreline Task Group, and 12 associated public and private individuals for conspiracy, wire fraud, and racketeering. A wave of sound hit the room, cries of relief, camera shutters clicking like a million insects. Furthermore, Chen continued, all eviction notices associated with the Harbor Project are hereby declared null and void, effective immediately. The room just exploded. People were crying, hugging each other. Mrs. Sanchez was looking right at me, her hand over her heart, tears streaming down her face. I had done it. No, we had done it. The head of my old department, the Bureau of Urban Integrity, a man I'd never seen before, went to the podium next. He looked gray and terrified. He announced that the BUI was ceding all management of the Harbor District, pending the federal investigation, to a new, independent community trust. And, he said, reading stiffly from a card, we have extended an invitation to Miss Ren Delgado, whose civic diligence brought these matters to light, to serve as the trust's first transparency and ethics advisor. My old boss, Henderson, the one who had signed the affidavit against me, was standing in the back, by the door. He caught my eye. I didn't scowl, I didn't smile, I just looked at him until he looked away. Then, the press scrum parted. Lucian Armand walked to the podium. You could have heard a pin drop. He wasn't in cuffs. He wasn't a witness. He was just there. He was wearing a simple, dark gray suit. His knuckles were still bruised. He looked out of place. An apex predator in a room full of paperwork. My name is Lucian Armand, he said, his voice quiet, but the microphones picked up every syllable. For 2 decades, the Armand Syndicate has operated a redevelopment arm. It was my father's business. It was built on the principle of growth at any cost. He looked at the crowd. He wasn't talking to the cameras. He was talking to the people. As of 9 a.m. this morning, that arm of the syndicate has been permanently dissolved. A new wave of whispers in its place, he continued. I have established the Evergreen Harbor Mutual, a private fund capitalized with 100% of the dissolved division's assets, dedicated to providing rent-to-own assistance and legal aid for tenants in this city. He was, in effect, giving away an empire. He reached into his pocket, and he pulled out the ring. My heart stopped. It was clean. He must have gone back for it. He'd fished it out of that barrel of stagnant water. He held it up, the gold falcon glinting in the camera flashes. He uncurled his fingers. He was sliding it off his hand, in front of everyone. He turned, stepped away from the podium, and walked directly to me. The cameras swarmed, following him. He didn't care. He stopped right in front of me, in the middle of the crowded room, creating a bubble of pure, terrifying silence. He held the ring, warm and heavy, in his open palm, then gently, he placed it in my hand. He leaned in, his voice for me, but his words for the microphones, for the whole city. Since the day you laughed at this ring, he said, his voice low and steady. I knew gold was just an empty laugh if it couldn't protect what was right. You don't belong to me. His eyes held mine. They were raw, open, and terrified. I'm asking, he whispered, to belong to you, if you'll have me. The entire room was holding its breath. I looked down at the heavy, gaudy piece of gold in my palm, the symbol of blood and fear and power that had started all of this. Then I looked up, past him, to the families in the front row, who were now holding up their nullified eviction notices. I closed my hand around the ring, and I pushed it gently back against his chest. Keep the ring, I whispered. I saw the flicker in his eyes, the momentary, sharp intake of breath. He thought it was a rejection. I stepped closer, my voice for him alone. Keep it, I said again, my voice fierce, and wear it as a promise, to them, to this city, that you'll keep your word, that you'll build something instead of just owning it. I looked up at his face, at the man I had fallen in love with. When you've kept that promise, then you can slide it onto my hand, not as a mark of ownership, but as a token, between two partners. He didn't say anything. His throat worked. He looked down at the ring in my hand, then back to my face. Slowly, he nodded, and he slid the Armand signet back onto his finger. We didn't stay for the rest. We slipped out the side door, into the clean, post-rain air of the city. Later that night, the world was a distant hum. We weren't at the Orion penthouse. We were at my studio, the one at the Salt Line printing press. I had rented it for the whole night. The presses in the next room were running, a low, rhythmic thud, thud, thud that vibrated in the floor. The air smelled of newsprint, cleaning solvents, and fresh, black ink. I was at my drafting table, but I wasn't drawing. I was just staring at a blank page. I heard him come in. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. He'd rolled up the sleeves of his white shirt. He had a bag from the Salt Line diner. He didn't speak. He just set the bag down and walked over to me. He put his hands on the table, on either side of my blank page, caging me in. He looked at the paper, then at me. You're done, I asked softly. I'm done, he said. He leaned down and he kissed me. It wasn't like the first kiss in the studio, the one of adrenaline and discovery. It wasn't the desperate, grounding touch on the pier or the kiss of survival in the rail yard. This was peace. It was slow. It was deep. It was a complete and total surrender. His hands left the table, one moving to my waist, the other coming up to cup my face. My hands, stained with ink, came up to rest on his chest, right over his heart. I could feel it beating, steady and strong. There was no rush. There was no fear. There was just the low thud of the presses, the smell of ink, and the overwhelming, undeniable warmth of him. His lips were soft, and the kiss was a promise that had nothing to do with gold. We broke apart, but only to breathe. He rested his forehead against mine. I closed my eyes, my hands sliding up to clasp behind his neck. His hands encircled my waist, pulling me off the stool until I was standing, pressed against him. I have my question. He whispered against my skin. I know. I whispered back. And I know the answer, but not yet. Ask me when the city is safe. He held me, his arms a steel and velvet circle. The yellow light from my desk lamp was warmer, richer, and more valuable than any metal. The next morning, I went to work, not at the BUI, but at my drafting table. 1 week later, Ring of the Harbor hit the shelves of every comic shop and newsstand in Port Halcyon. It was my story, the real story. It was about a girl who laughed at a gangster's ring. It was about corrupt inspectors and rubber stamps. It was about a boss who learned that real power wasn't about holding a city, but about protecting its people. It wasn't a romance, not really. It was a dark, gritty, funny, and deeply hopeful look at the city. It sold out in 6 hours. The final knot came untied 2 weeks after that. The court, using the evidence from the safe and my testimony, formally invalidated every single permit Kestrel had filed. Their project was dead. I was standing on the courthouse steps, breathing the free air, when he walked up. Lucian. He'd just come from a meeting with Agent Chen, signing the final cooperation agreement. He was testifying against the last of the Kestrel executives. He was clean. He stopped in front of me, in the bright sunlight. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in dark jeans and a simple black shirt. He looked younger. He looked light. I glanced at his hand. The ring was gone. He saw me looking. He smiled. That small, real smile that was just for me. He held out his hand, the one that used to wear the ring. It was bare. I took it. Our fingers laced together. "When the city," he said, his voice low, his thumb stroking my knuckles, "is finally as safe as your embrace." I'll finish that sentence I started. I leaned my head on his shoulder, and we looked out at the city. Our city. "I know," I said, smiling, "and when you do, I won't laugh at the ring anymore, because we made it mean something." Thank you so much for listening to our story. We'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Please drop a comment below. Share your thoughts, and let's talk. Don't forget to subscribe to Mafia Boss Stories, like this video, and give us a little extra support by hitting that hype button to help this story reach more people.